from former Arizona Governor Bruce Babbitt at a meeting of the Polk County, Iowa Democratic Party.
Jack, thank you very much. I'd like at the outset to introduce to you one other Arizonan who is with me. She is a trial lawyer in Phoenix. She was the First Lady of Arizona for 9 years. She is the mother of our 2 small children, my wife, Hattie. Well, did you all approve of the outcome of the basketball game? You know, a couple people have been ungracious enough to ask me which side I'm on. And I'll tell you, it reminds me of a story about the dilemma of a sick old man who is lying on his deathbed, about ready to exit from this world. And the preacher is by his side, exhorting him, saying, "You must renounce Satan. You must renounce the devil." And the old man, about to depart this world, looks up and says, "I really don't feel like I'm in a position to antagonize anyone." That game also had me thinking about that day several years ago when Henry Koffler, who was and is the president of the University of Arizona, called me at the governor's office, and he said, "Bruce, I've been searching the country for a new basketball coach, and we've zeroed in on this guy named Lute Olson from Iowa. What do you think?" And I paused and I said, "Henry, you've got to be a closet supporter of Dick Gephardt." Every 4 years, once every 4 years, our democracy affords us a season of national reckoning, a time to take stock, to think about where we are, where we've been, and where it is that we're going. It was back in 1980 that Ronald Reagan told us. He said, "If you elect me, America will stand tall." Now it's 1987, and it's time to take stock and to ask, where do we stand? In Iran, we have a president who tells us he stands tall against terrorists. Then on his hands and knees, he pays ransom. He denies it. He blames Israel, and he hides behind aides who hide behind the Fifth Amendment. Is that standing tall? In Central America, we have a president who tells us that he stands firm for democracy. And then he whips up a mercenary army and recruits sultans and swindlers to support it. And then he calls them all heroes for terrorizing innocent civilians. Is that standing up for democracy? Here at home, we have an administration that pledged to take a stand for farms. And they have. For corporate farms, for European farms, for Canadian farms. But what about family farms? What about family farms in Iowa and in the United States? Why won't the president take a stand for them? In 1980, President Reagan told us, he said, "Elect me, and I'll take a stand for fiscal responsibility. I'll balance the budget." Since 1980, we've had the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth largest deficits in the history of this country. What kind of stand is that? For 10 years, the president told us he wanted deep arms cuts. Then, a few months ago in Reykjavik, the Russian, the only planet that we have. Is that standing tall? No, that's not standing tall. That's standing still. And that's why America will elect our nominee as the next president of the United States. Now, I think there are two questions that you, as caucus attenders, must ask of anyone seeking the presidency. First, who are they? And second, what is their vision of America? Let me tell you briefly who I am and what I stand for. My real commitment as a Democrat came about in the summer of 1962. It was in South America. I was a geologist working on the front range of the Andes in Bolivia for an oil company. And that summer, for the first time in my life, I saw people starving. And I went about my work that summer and I kept thinking about all of those people in those towns, starving, powerless to control their fate. And I began asking myself a question: what am I doing about it? What am I here to do? And why can't I make a difference about things like that? And by the time that summer was over, I knew that I had to try to make a difference. And I left and I came back to the United States and went on to law school. And then in the spring of 1965, another event occurred in my life that again made a change, a deep change. It was March of 1965. And like many Americans, I began seeing on television and hearing the words of a young black minister from Atlanta named Martin Luther King, Jr. And I began reading about the incidents that were taking place in a small town called Selma, Alabama. I remember reading about a young black man, Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was shot and killed by the state police as he was trying to exercise his right to register to vote. And then I heard about a young minister from Boston named James Reeb, who was pulled off the streets of Selma and beaten to death by a mob. And a woman, a housewife from Detroit named Viola Liuzzo, who was shot through the head and killed in the middle of the night by the Ku Klux Klan. And I listened and I knew that I had to go. And I left and I went to Selma, Alabama. And I joined with hundreds of other Americans on the steps of Brown's Chapel and helped to start a wave of protest and indignation that moved from that chapel all the way up to the state capitol at Montgomery and then on to Washington. And I began to understand in those months that one individual can make a difference, that we do have the power to affect the stress and the search for social justice. And that's the point at which I decided that my life lay in fighting for those issues. Now, where do we start? It's 1987, and the question is, where do we start on the way back? I think we have to start with the economy. We must start with what really counts. Jobs, good jobs, a strong, thriving economy that will lift everyone up and provide a sense of opportunity for everyone in this nation. Now, if we're going to do that, we need to understand what it is that's happening in this nation and why it is that we're having such problems. What's happening is this. It's the most fundamental change in the history of this century. And it's simply this: the American economic ideal of capitalism and market enterprise is now taking root all over this world. The American way is on the march. Look at what's happening in Korea and Malaysia and Hong Kong and Singapore and Taiwan, and yes, even in the People's Republic of China. Something extraordinary is happening. The momentum is on our side. Marxism is dead meat. The future and the momentum are now on the side of American ideals and economics. But the irony is this. The irony is this: we risk becoming the victims of our own success, because in the process of creating a new world, America must now compete and work and live by the rules that are imposed by these extraordinary changes. And what it means is we need to do some things very differently. We have to start at home, in the workplace, right here in the United States. We have to understand that those new rules require more productivity and more skill and more achievement than ever. And that we're going to have to break down the barriers between labor and management, that we don't have time or the space for an adversary system in which executives say to workers, take a 30% wage cut while we're raising our bonuses. We have to move away to a new world, a world of a share economy, a world in which every worker has a stake in the success of that business, in which every worker shares, not only in the management, and certainly not just in the losses, but in the successes, gain sharing. And we need to take a new look, a fundamental new look at the rules by which Americans compete abroad. President Reagan says, trade deficits don't make a difference. Let it happen. But it does make a difference. That's why steel workers are out of jobs in Detroit, and that's why auto workers are out of jobs in Michigan. And that's what underlies families leaving the farm here in Iowa, and electronics workers in Arizona, because it does make a difference. And the Democrats have to step up to that reality and admit one simple fact. It's time to rewrite the rules. It's time to rewrite the rules of trade. Because if we don't, our children are destined to live in an economy in which we earn a living by washing each other's laundry, by cooking pizzas for each other, by cashing checks, by running hotels for Japanese and German tourists. And it's time for Democrats to say we can do better, and to step up and to assert one simple rule. The big players, the trading nations of the world, must balance their accounts. Now, that doesn't mean they need to balance each and every trading relationship. It simply means that on a multilateral basis, viewed all the way around on the average, that nations must go for balance. What goes out must come back in. Do we have the power to do that? Yes, but the hour is late. And it will take a president with the ability to step up and recognize the realities and rewrite the rules of the world trading order. Now, we're Democrats. And we're Democrats because at the very core, what distinguishes us is our thirst for justice. That's what unites Democrats. That's our historic obligation in this country, to say we're the party that believes that the job is never quite finished, that we must always move on to a higher level of opportunity and justice. Where are we today? Where are we today? Today, we're at a way station called Graham-Rudman. Graham-Rudman. Graham-Rudman is the antithesis of everything that our party stands for, because Graham-Rudman is a statement that there are no priorities. It's an abdication of moral responsibility, because the people who vote for those kinds of things are saying, we don't have any priorities. We lack the guts to step up and assert the moral priorities that are at the heart, at the core of what it means to be a Democrat. You may ask, what are my priorities? My priorities can be summed up in one word. It's a word that speaks of abuse, of neglect, of malnourishment, of lack of medical care. And it's also a word that speaks of us and our future. That word is children. Children. 1 of every 4 American children is living in poverty. Half of them don't even have medical care. Don't we have the capacity to say that as an absolute must, a real priority, every child in this country ought to be entitled to medical care? Isn't that a priority? And what about daycare? The president says women shouldn't work, but welfare mothers must. What about the children that those mothers are leaving at home? What about those children? And it isn't a time that we step forward and say we can create a program, a national program which says that daycare assistance will be available to every mother who goes into the workforce. Isn't that a priority? Isn't that a priority? And it's time to say the same thing about preschool education and nurture and revolutionary change in education here in the United States of America. The Reagan era is nearly over. The Reagan era is nearly over. And that means that it's time to begin again, time to recreate America. And I believe simply that America can be productive and that we can recapture the leadership of the world economy. And I believe that we must care for and educate our children, that we can clean and protect our land and water, that we must protect the planet with arms control. America today is in mid-passage on a journey to a newer world. It can surely be a better world because we have the means to make sure that it is. 200 years later, our Constitution is still the most successful political idea in history. It only needs leadership to give it life and courage to bear its awesome responsibilities. We Americans do not shrink from those responsibilities. Indeed, we've always embraced them. And all we need 2 years from now is the resolve to live up to our very own and our very best. To do that, I would like your help. Thank you very much.